We are here today at New York City Performance Lab. I'm here with physiologist Sydney Brackett and coach Dave Mendelsohn. You are watching the Road to the Race series on the Marni on the Move podcast, and this is episode 3. We are talking about all the really cool things you can do to level up your athleticism, your training, from tests and more. Thanks for being here. Sydney, thank you so much for all of your help today. Talk to me about how you got into being a physiologist and what drove you to get to this place.
Sure. So I was an athlete my whole life, basically grew up playing soccer, and I ended up playing Division I soccer as well as running track and field collegiately, which was a couple years ago now. I feel like
at Syracuse.
At Syracuse.
We have to say that because I know one of our listeners is a huge fan.
Yes. So I'm very familiar with upstate New York. But yeah, I guess I'm just one of those people whose academic and athletic careers complemented each other nicely. So I was lucky enough to study basically what I practiced. Got my master's, and then I moved to New York City a couple years ago. I originally came here for a age management medical job, so like concierge medicine, longevity medicine. I worked as an exercise physiologist in that space, and then a little bit more recently transitioned to performance lab, which we do have a lot of the longevity components, which is huge, but it marries very well with the performance side of things, which you're not going to get at like a health practice or a private practice like that. So it's been great here. That's kind of my road. And yeah.
So what kind of tests do you offer here at NYC Performance Lab?
The VO2 Max test, huge buzzword recently. Everyone knows kind of, if they don't know what it means, they've heard it name dropped here and there. Volume of oxygen, O2 max, so it's measuring the maximal volume of oxygen you can breathe in and send to your muscles. We're not just getting one variable from this performance test, it's several. We get a tidal volume, a ventilation, so we're looking at pulmonary function, we're looking at your body's ability to essentially exercise at different heart rate intensities. It's huge in terms of a clinical setting, like your cardiovascular fitness is really your fifth or sixth vital sign. Like it's as important as your resting heart rate, your max heart rate, your blood pressure. Just like temperature would tell you if you're sick, your VO2 max also gives a lot of indicators on your body's ability to withstand, external stimuli. So
how is this different from, we all have Apple Watches and Garmin watches,
Sure.
And it says your VO2 max on there, which I think after watching Dave do the test, and I know I'm going to be doing it in a little bit, is so different.
Yeah, so if you think about it in terms of, essentially people come in here to get a VO2 max test done, and it's an experiment, which means it's controlled. We have you fasted, 6 hours caffeine, 4 from food. We generally try to make sure that you are well rested. You're at your best, and there's nothing in your stomach or in your body that would influence the data. So that's not what you're getting with a wearable. Your wearable is extrapolating data based on all of the training that you do, which is very rarely fasted or, for some of us, uncaffeinated. So it's realistically a prediction based on your heart rate at certain training intensities, and it's more complicated in terms of how the equation outputs the VO2 max prediction by default, but there is no way to get a true value unless you're doing a breath by breath test, which is what we do here.
So it's scientific.
It's predictive. It's predicted, yeah.
I'm asking one more question, then I'm handing the mic over to Dave because I feel like he might have more questions about specifics around the test. But if I'm an athlete, how often do you think I should do this test to check in with myself?
Yeah, so I think for athletes, like any notion of progressive overload, if you're not changing anything, nothing's going to change. So if you are moving the needle the top 10% in your marathon training, test in 3 months. Test after something has changed about what you're doing. So there's no reason to put yourself through a grueling test like that if there's nothing that you're doing in your training life that would indicate it would have improved or gone down. So for non-athletic populations are people who test for, clinical indications.
And
There's
just overall health.
and longevity. There's no limit to when or why you should test, especially if it's, a health concern.
And just get started is the best thing.
Yeah.
And then Dave, how do you see this after doing this? This is your second time doing it. So how do you see this being really valuable for yourself and then also for your athletes?
Yeah, I did my first test here at New York City Performance Lab about 3 or 4 months ago, and I think then they said to come back around now to do it again now that I've been into training. For me, it was really a nice eye opener because people talk about different zones that they want to train at, and when you're doing your long run, you want to be in a lower zone, maybe zone 3, or some people talk about 2 or 3. You don't want to go too hard. When you're doing speed work, you want to be into that zone 4 or even into zone 5. And then there are tempo runs and so forth. There's a lot of different zones, but people are always asking me, well, what's my zone? And you can get a rough estimate from the age and all these things, calculations at age minus 220 or whatever, all this stuff. But it's not accurate. It's just sort of like a guess. So I wanted to know, what's the real number? And now how can I then go back to my watch and Strava and all the other things that have that in and reprogram it in and get a good idea of what my zones really should be. And that's what I look for in the athletes that I coach too, because they'll ask me, what's my zone 2 or what's my zone 3? And I don't know. I mean, it's going to be different for people, but this will tell them and it also tells me. So now I can go back and say, Steve's, VO2 Max is X number, 54 or something, and his, zone 2 and zone 3 are going to be this range. And then when he says, well, what should I be doing my long run in? I could say, Steve, you should be, if you're looking at your watch and your heart rate is, around this bracket, 120, 130, whatever, then that's going to be what, this particular zone is. And it helps them to put something, a number into their training so they can actually train a lot more smartly. And you could do that by all kinds of estimates, and my watch will estimate that too. But if you really want to go to the next level, there's science there that can do that for you, and that's why I came here, because I wanted someone who could do that.
Do you see a difference in looking at the data? I know you don't have all the data today, but I would love to know if you see a difference from what you've been seeing on your Garmin and what you feel when you're running versus what you're getting today.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I'm just going to quickly pull up my Garmin that estimates it. And I did this before, so I know how it's going to work. But the Garmin and my Apple Watch too are lower. They ended up being lower.
You have an Apple Watch?
Yeah, I have an Apple Watch. Does that surprise you?
Yes.
Why?
I thought you'd have a Garmin.
I do have a Garmin.
Okay.
I wear the Apple Watch for the watch.
Recreational.
Yeah, and I run with my Garmin. In fact, it's downstairs in my bag. I'll run with it later today. But in the Garmin app, there's something that's a VO2 Max, and they estimate it. Mine's been estimated at 57.
Right.
So that's good from what I understand, and all that stuff. But how accurate is it? And like Sydney was saying before, it's taking measurements on when I was with a full stomach or a lot of caffeine. I run a lot in the morning, and I always drink a lot of coffee.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be scientific. So the tests that we'll get the results for later, they're going to look a little different than what this says. I think that my Apple Watch or Apple Health had me at 48 or something of that sort.
Yeah.
So, and again, I'm not wearing these things all the time, so they're not even getting the full picture. I was once told that, you need to wear always sleep all the time in the day. I wear this Apple Watch to sleep, but I don't run with it, and my Garmin I run with, but I don't sleep with it. So there's no way that it can get a real accurate picture.
Yeah.
But here, it's a controlled space, and you're doing everything you can, and there's no space for questions or everything.
It eliminates error.
It eliminates the error.
What
Exactly.
was his VO2 Max today?
65.9.
65.9.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was a little higher than what my Garmin or my Apple Watch said. And I think I don't remember what it was last time, but it was
65.8.
65.8.
So you went up 0.1.
So yeah, so I did go up a little bit. I wasn't looking to increase it. I mean, it would be great to increase it, but I wanted to keep a pulse on it to make sure that over the last few months I wasn't doing anything wrong and it was decreasing. And I also did a body scan that I think you'll tell us about. And I was really interested in that because when I kicked off my training, this training block, I had been coming off of an injury. I hadn't been running nearly as much. And but I knew that I was feeling better, and I knew I had a solid 3 or 4 months of real work ahead of me, and I wanted to get a good baseline, which I did. And now later on, I'm really curious to see how that has paid off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some of the other tests that you offer here at NYC Performance Lab?
Yeah, of course. So we do, in terms of like comprehensiveness to adhering to several different types of athletes, we are probably, at least in Manhattan, offer way more services. Everything from like reaction time testing for specific sports to like a resting metabolic rate test. So we do that. The RMR, resting metabolic rate test, uses the same analyzer as you would use for a VO2 max test. So it's looking at your breath analysis. And this gives, clients an indication of how many calories their body burns just performing autonomic functions. So breathing, blinking, thermic effect of food. You can extrapolate a total energy expenditure, and basically it just makes things easier to achieve your goals. It takes the guesswork out of calorie tracking. We do obviously the 3D body scan, which is really good at identifying obviously the lean mass, body fat mass, bone mass components, but also bilateral asymmetries, which can contribute to mobility issues, all that type of stuff. So we would see that.
I'm
as well.
super lopsided. I can't
Sorry,
stop laughing.
I am too. It's totally fine. We do grip strength testing, mostly from a longevity standpoint. Functional strength as you age is super important. Grip strength is one of the best indicators for that.
Is that the thing I
So the dynamometer.
Yeah,
so there's some super ugly janky ones out there. We have a really high tech one that we can do several different types of metrics with. It's not just going to be this. We can do different things with it.
I have a question about
Yeah.
that. So, unrelated to being an athlete, but just for longevity, I mean, that almost sounds like a bone density test kind of thing, where it's one of those things when you find out the results that there's a lot you can do to improve it.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of how that specifically relates to bone mineral density, it actually is pretty direct, because if you think about what proliferates bone or increases the amount of bone mineral density that you have, it's actually weight-bearing activity, but that's also something that increases your muscle mass. So people with higher bone mineral densities and better skeletal muscle mass profiles often have higher grip strength, which is why it's so important to test as we age, and using it as a metric of
That's great.
your functional strength over time. I mean, both are very interrelated.
Interesting. I kind of picked up on that, even though I haven't really seen the grip test. And then what are some of the other tests? Because I totally sidelined you again.
No, you're totally fine. So we do a 3D movement analysis, which just basically uses a camera. If somebody comes in with a specific issue, basically poor ankle flexion or something in the upper body range of motion, we'll specify the tests within this movement analysis to target that. We can also just do a general full body one, and this will help our PT on staff kind of diagnose and make changes to their training blocks and programs, so that they're getting taken care of the way that they need to be.
So for one of my athletes, I could also see the application of that in terms of long training blocks leading up to a marathon or an Ironman, where we know they're going to have a lot of months to train. They could come in and get a test that could help to identify something that might go wrong down the road.
Sure.
Right? You might say, well, you are lopsided, or you need to do this or that, and then they might be able to work with me to build some type of extra strength into it, so that 2 months from now they're not injured because of a weakness that they weren't addressing.
Yeah. I mean, to train, you have to identify and fix structural issues first. You can always jump in and do a back squat, but if you don't know, you can't fix what you don't know.
Right.
So, you can always move backwards, but why do that when you can do it right? And numbers don't lie, so that's kind of why we're so data driven here. We can identify all of these things and propel clients forward without having the question mark of, am I going to have a sacral issue 6 months from now? Do I have shin splints? Am I going to end up with this? Do I have enough mobility in my ankles, which is a huge one. Yeah. So that's kind of why there's strength in numbers, and we, test everything.
So then you guys can run tests, find the weakness areas that people
Sure.
have.
Yeah.
And then you also have a program that you can build out to address any of these issues.
Yeah, so we can refer internally to our PT and, make sure that people are adequately prepared for the strain that they plan to take on.
So would that be a test that you might do for that? And I know Dave is going to want to expound upon this because this is his wheelhouse, would be doing like a run analysis, form analysis, because when you mentioned shin splints and I said I was lopsided, I once did a run analysis test, and that is how I know that I'm lopsided. And with that test, I was told to do clamshells and certain bridges,
so
and
that would be like a phase 1 to a PT
Yeah.
program in reaction to data that we identify, which is something that we do very, very often. A run analysis or a gait analysis is a great way to see if you're compensating on either foot. Physical therapists have a super in-depth knowledge of what to look for in terms of that, more so than physiologists do, but that's why having those people in the same space complements each other so well. Definitely in terms of mobility stuff and bilateral asymmetries, so many of the tests that we do here are looking to identify that.
And this is so important, especially, if you're a weekend warrior, just doing your first marathon or for whatever reason, or if you're a serious athlete, because, and it's not, I feel like this is from my own personal experience, like you have to check it annually because it's not like a do it once and it's over, because your body changes and so it's super important. I'm a huge advocate for like what you said, which is like, if you don't know something, you don't know it. And if you know something, you can fix it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's getting a physical checkup. It's just more preventative.
Yeah. And then that leads me to my favorite test that I did once and totally wasn't the same test. The lactate threshold test. So talk to me a little bit about what that is. Why is it important for athletes? Why do some coaches recommend it?
Sure.
Do you need it like as a regular athlete, or is it really just for pros?
So in terms of being a regular athlete versus a pro, I mean, if you're in a type of sport where that data would benefit you, which is most endurance sports, then, absolutely, I think a lactate threshold test can be super illuminating. So basically, many different protocols out there in terms of this test specifically, but we take you up a couple miles or 0.5 miles per hour every couple minutes. So 4 minutes for us specifically. We take a blood prick, see what the millimoles of blood lactate you're currently at. We get a corresponding heart rate and a corresponding VO2 max. So all of this data shows us how your body's reacting to the current strain that you're putting it in. The idea behind this is by getting your lactate thresholds, your second threshold specifically, which is where you're super anaerobically dominant. It's kind of where you start to feel junky. This threshold is where you cross 4 millimoles of blood lactate. And this is where, by training right underneath, you can essentially push that glass ceiling higher. So people do like lactate threshold training very commonly in like an 800-meter track and field sport, right? Because it's one of the only events that's not dominant in either anaerobic metabolism or aerobic. It's very even.
The 800?
The 800, yeah. It's also the hardest one, in my opinion. So that will allow athletes to essentially know the exact heart rate that they are hitting their LT2 or their second lactate threshold. And like practicing any sport, the more time you spend doing something, or effectively in this situation right underneath it, the better your body gets at it. So physiologically, it'll push everything back, which realistically also improves your VO2 max.
For a lot of my athletes, I'll tell them often to run something at 80% effort or 70% effort,
which is
90% effort, but no one really knows what is that effort for me. It's like, I might feel today.
It's perceived exertion on a given day.
Yeah, but now we have the numbers, so you could say it's not whatever.
Yeah,
don't
like you're running
80%.
at 164 beats per minute.
Yep, and
whether
don't
you like
run
it or
any
not.
faster.
Yeah.
So over time, you'll run at that, as you said, you'll run at that slightly lower threshold or just below the threshold, and that will later in time increase what your potential could be.
Yeah. And also in terms of like a repeat lactate threshold test, so everybody needs a baseline for everything to, build upon it essentially. But, your body's ability to recycle lactate and use it as energy is not just a threshold. It's occurring every second that you're moving. So we take the data points at every 4-minute interval for a reason, because physiologically, you spend time in a certain heart rate zone, you get better at it. So if people get better in certain heart rate zones, we can extrapolate, okay, maybe they got worse in this one. This is what we need to do in terms of changing training paces. So it's not just about that one moment in the entire test. It's important on many fronts, and from minute 0 to however long it lasts for a given person.
So then when someone is working with the coach, so if somebody comes here and they do this test, like, you'll be able to give them a lot of information as an expert and a physiologist. But if they're working with a coach, it's really helpful for the coach. I mean, Dave, do you find this to be helpful? And also, what are some tests that you do where you're just on your own, like having your athletes do certain tests to figure these things out?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that this takes away the guesswork for a coach. And also, I'll say, as a coach, I don't think everybody needs to have a coach. Right. A lot of these metrics and numbers are nice so that you could do it on your own. I like, as a coach, to tell people to get one, but it's not for everyone. So either way, now you're going to have an idea of like what you can do and how you could either self-coach or give some better info to me as your coach, so that I have like the full picture and I can get rid of any of the guesswork. Or, I've been doing it for a long time, so my guesswork is probably good, but this is going to be great. So if somebody really can dial in exactly what they should be working at, then they'll be able to know that if they do this right, they will get better. If I tell people, if you run a lot, you'll get faster. If you do speed work, you'll get faster. But this is like really, this is the science behind it, right? Yeah. So, and a lot of us, we spend a lot of money on different toys and tools. We have watches that tell us all these things. Some people like to run with nothing at all, and they don't need the numbers. A lot of people, I'm obsessed with what's my pace, what's my distance. This is for you for that. It's more numbers that you can have and understand. And also, I think of it as like with younger people starting out, it's good to get a baseline for a lot of different reasons, to maximize their potential, but also to minimize injury. But if you're older, we had talked earlier on longevity, so you can keep doing this into whatever your sport is. Go until you are, shipped away in a pine box far in the future, but you've been able to do the sport all your life because you've avoided injury. And you could get better at it that way too.
I think also there are a lot of new, younger, like 20-something runners that are getting into the sport, and it's good to start with good habits. And I think a lot of these people are different than, say, the runners when I was 20, that it was so cool to like run barefoot and have no food and starve yourself like the whole run. And now it's like a whole different kind of education around, and maybe it's science that has educated people, but
I think generally people are just more informed. Yeah, I think the data is also more accessible, whereas before it wasn't. It was like trendy, and now it's very much, people want to do things right, which I think comes with time with almost any field, I think, in terms of just people knowing and information being widespread. Yeah,
there's like an old school mentality around like not eating anything on a run even
I mean, the running community has had its ups and downs with that type of stuff for sure.
As a triathlete, I bring enough food for every single person on the bike path.
Smart.
Every time. People are like, where are you going?
Smart.
So you guys do a lot of different tests overall, a wide range of different tests. If you had 2 or 3 tests that you would recommend as like a good place to start for an athlete, what would you recommend?
I would recommend the VO2 Max for sure. Every single person can benefit from that. I would recommend the RMR test. Knowing about your metabolic health is not just knowing your basal metabolic rate. Like, where it is relative to people your age is also an indicator of your muscle mass profile, and if your habits and your lifestyle is conducive of burning a lot of energy, which is correlated with better health. That's a huge one. And then the 3D body scan, just because I think, again, like, you should sit percent body fat wise where you feel healthiest, But again, you don't know what you don't test. So having a baseline there can be super informative. Like, you see yourself in the mirror every day. You know how you feel every day. It's hard to test. You wouldn't know if things were changing.
Right. I liked the body test, the scan, but what I didn't like, I was like, oh my God, that's what I look like from behind.
Yeah, no, the visual is interesting for sure.
It is, but it gives you a real picture of what's going on. Plus you get a lot of different numbers. I remember, I'm sure we'll talk about it, but I remember seeing, it doesn't just like, it's not a picture of your body, but now you know how big your left bicep is compared to your right bicep.
Yeah, so there's 21 circumferences that we get from that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And from that, you're able to tell where your imbalances are. And that's one of the biggest things that people get injured on, is if they're not paying attention to their full balance of their body.
Muscle mass wise, like, I have significant more lean mass in my left leg than my right, because I played left flank. So every ball I kicked was crossed with my left foot for 18 years. That will never change. The problem becomes when your compensation reflects that issue. So it's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, for me, my imbalance is because of a positive thing. It's because of a sport that I played for a long time. But if there's no direct correlation, or like, think about somebody who had ACL repair, that leg will have more lean mass on it for the rest of that person's life, even though you might think otherwise because of the atrophy that happens during a process like that. The PT that has to be done to get that ligament back to a point of being functional, 99% of the time that person's going to have more lean mass. It's a positive thing. It was built. Where we see the issue there is, okay, it's compensating for something. There's no reason for this increase or bilateral asymmetry, which likely is also followed by a mobility issue that they probably just don't know about.
So are you still playing soccer at all?
So I played semi-professional for a year or two after college. I will never turn down an opportunity to kick a ball, but at some point your legs get tired. Mine are a little bit tired. It's to play at that level, it becomes at some point like just too high risk. Like, if I tear an ACL at this age now and it's going to affect like my career, it's probably not as more implications than just being a collegiate athlete and having the rehab that you have accessible.
And so you're training for the New York City Marathon.
So I'm training I do run long distance now. Yes.
So do you have any questions for Dave?
I mean, how many have you run?
Well, this will be the 17th in New York, but around 100.
Sure. Wow.
Marathons in total.
That's crazy.
Everything about the New York City Marathon.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I've heard it's a hard course.
It's not. It's
okay.
if you train smartly in the months leading up, no marathon is, well, I shouldn't say none.
Yeah.
They're all doable, but it's all on you. If you do the right training, it won't be hard. It's going to be hard because it's 26.2 miles.
Well, I feel like anything, the hard part's not the race itself.
It's getting to the race?
It's getting to the race.
That's 100% true. We should use that.
Yeah.
That's really true.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we talked about last week on the podcast, getting to the race. Do you mean getting there literally?
No, she means the preparation.
No, the preparation is the hard part.
The training?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you meant like taking the ferry. That's also
honestly,
really hard.
that too. For someone who can't get anywhere by themselves.
We can answer that part. The podcast can do that.
No,
We've got that.
You
have us on all the getting to it in terms of making sure that people don't get injured. Because that's really the issue. You have months of training, amping your training up, a lot of running, more than what people are probably usually doing in that build, and that's where a lot of injuries come. So I think that knowing any imbalances that your body has, you can predict what you need to do to compensate for that before it becomes an issue. And also you can use all the different scans that you guys do to help set those thresholds, the zones and all the stuff to train in, to do it smartly, but also just to get a good picture of where you're starting and where you are later on.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to say, it's like not too late for people, even though it's September or next week, to come in and test. And I'm sure that, if you're doing the New York City Marathon, you're deep into your training, but it's always good to get the tests and see where you're at.
Sure. And
sort of like fine tune things. And
I mean, we've got 2 months, a little less than 10 weeks to move the needle the last 10%. Yeah. So.
Well, this has been like super awesome. Do you have more questions?
No, I think this is great.
I mean, this has been so, I can re-clip that, but I didn't mean to interrupt you. You were saying, like, we still have 2 months.
Yeah, no, we still have 2 months. So if you've been training for, especially in New York City, this marathon specifically, this is where it actually starts to matter. I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but my mileage just bumped up pretty significantly in the last 2 weeks. So,
Dave.
Yeah, I think actually that you hit on something that I think we should hammer home. Is like you're ramping up your training and now you're into it.
Mm-hmm.
And from my experience coaching a lot of people and running a lot of marathons, this is where it starts to become an issue for people.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times everything is going great. You start to think like the running isn't so bad anymore. I'm in a groove, and then you start to feel like I must have like figured it out. I'm invincible, and then an injury happens. And the injuries don't happen usually at the beginning of the training. They happen midway through or toward the end of it. So coming in now to get a test to see what's going on with your body could be the thing that stops you from getting an injury 2 weeks.
It gets you to the starting line. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's great. This has been super awesome. Thank you.
Of course, thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Dave.
We're gonna get you on the treadmill.